I'm gonna crack mine. I'm gonna get right to it.
Yeah, I'm
I
gonna
don't
crack
need to
mine.
waste too much time.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of let mine sit. What do you got for your glassware?
I, the nerd that I am, went and got Westmalle glass. It actually prompted me to do something else kind of funny, which I haven't even told Scott about yet. It was one of those gift packs that was sitting on
Yeah, yeah,
the warm shelf for like Lord knows how long, but I really
yeah,
wanted the glass.
yeah.
So I got it came with a bunch of double and triple, but this one's best buy date was up May of 2022. So, in the spirit of going live with vintage beer enthusiasts, we'll get to experiment with that a little bit. What I didn't tell you was I decided being a fresh beer enthusiast, I got to get one that's fresher too. So I'm I'm double pumping
Oh
Westmalle
my God. Okay,
glasses,
so you have
and we're gonna go through
you have
something a little fresher and something a little older with questionable storage conditions.
Yeah, all right, that sounds good. One of the things that often gets associated with, beers like this is the word Trappist. And so the first thing we want to do is kind of talk about what that means. And specifically, Trappist kind of has two main meanings to it. The first one is that it's a branch of the Cistercian order of monks founded in the mid to late 1600s, but it's also an appellation, a name that can be given or bestowed upon a beer. And there's three rules that have to be followed. The beer must be brewed on the grounds of the monastery, and then the brewing of the beer must be overseen by the monks of said monastery, and then all of the proceeds must be used only up to sustaining the monastery, and then anything beyond that is given to local charities or things like that. And then if we ever refer to, let's say, a brewery that brews a style that is, made popular by Trappists, we'll refer to that as an Abbey beer, a brewery that makes it, but they are not a Trappist certified brewery. So Westmalle kind of started the revival of brewing in Belgium in 1836. This was shortly after Belgium had gained its independence in 1830, and then about 100 years later, like many places after World War II, they had to rebuild the brewery. And then the Dubbel specifically is kind of, that we think has roots going as far back as the 1850s and was obviously a much different beer, much like many beers were back then, but obviously has changed over time. And one of the really big changes was in 1922, and that was the first time that they used caramelized sugar syrup, or what we call candy syrup. And they added that to the recipe. That raised the alcohol content, dried out the beer a little bit, and then in 1926, Westmalle Dubbel officially kind of arrived. That can take us into just the general recipe. This is a 1063 original gravity beer, and we're talking about this specific beer, Westmalle Dubbel. We're going to try and focus on this rather than getting too broad into the Belgian double style. So we've got a 1063 OG that's about 15.6 degrees Plato. It's going to float around 7% ABV. I think mine says 7 even, but I think in the past it's been around 7.3. It's going to be really highly attenuated, 87%, which is pretty high. 24 IBUs. For the grist, we've got Pilsner malt, and then light amounts of caramel and dark malt. And then obviously for adjuncts, we have the dark candy sugar. For hops, we have Tettnang, Styrian Golding, and Saaz. So we've got, interestingly, hops from 3 different regions, which is fun. And then one thing I did want to kind of mention is that there is a ton of variety in the Belgian double style when it comes to the grist especially. You might see in Abbey versions some things like Special B or aromatic malts, or you even might see some different adjuncts in Trappist versions like in Chimay Premier and Rochefort 6. Those both feature some kind of wheat, whether unmalted or malted wheat. This is Westmalle's specific way that they make theirs, and no two are going to be alike. Then when we're talking about yeast, Westmalle has their own house ale yeast. They pitch that, interestingly, in closed square fermentation vessels. They did make that transition at some point from open to closed, and then they started out at a 64 degree Fahrenheit temperature and then raised that up to 68, and then they have a 3-week secondary fermentation at 46 degrees. When they bottle it, they use a bottle conditioning method, and they use their primary yeast. Obviously, when you pour this, you're going to want to leave that yeast that's at the bottom of the bottle. It's not a style that's traditionally served with the yeast. And then for proper glassware, Chris and I both we're kind of in the like chalice realm, but obviously something like a Belgian tulip is more than fine. So we've kind of talked through all the things that we put into this beer. So, Chris, what do those things create? Give me kind of an overall like aroma and flavor breakdown.
Well, I cheated, and I've got a fresher one and a vintage one. The old liquor store warm aged version, and so mine are quite different. I think traditionally with Westmalle Dubbel, you can get a whole melange of like dark and dried fruits. I like even though this one's only 7%, that kind of like simple sugar, Belgian candy sugar fermentation profile almost always gives me like this floral thing that I really like a
Mm-hmm.
really pleasant floral higher alcohol character. There's just this bouquet. It's like potpourri with dried fruit peels. The older one, the one that's, I keep joking is expired. These beers, for only being 7%, if they're stored properly, you could probably hang on to one for quite a long
Yeah,
time, and they'll taste
absolutely.
pretty good. But the older one is definitely more like fruit leather instead of like a little bit like livelier stone fruit, like a plum or something like that. I'm getting more some concentrated apricot fruit leather. I like Westmalle doubles. Like the spice character is just like basically perfect for me. I don't know about for you. It's not one of those super tricky ones. Some of the Belgian Abbey styles are not particularly characterful with the phenols, so you'll get like a little bit of clove, maybe a little bit of pepper. This one's like kind of big, like right, like medium plus on some warming spice type character, almost nutmeggy. I don't know if I'm like tricking myself into that because
Well,
it's,
I think you're
festive.
getting well, but I also think that higher alcohol that you're getting, I mean, nutmeg is a warming spice. It's kind of in that almost warming, savory kind of realm, and so I think there's definitely a little bit of an association. I don't get kind of that white pepper thing that we often associate with phenolics in a Belgian style. Again, it's kind of more of these warming spices, maybe even also leaning, kind of into the clove realm too for me. And I just get the dark candy sugar. For me, it's just candied raisins. It's almost even like plums too, but very almost this great impression of sweetness from those aromatics and those flavors.
Yeah, I love that you said impression of sweetness too, because it's the big trick with these. You're like, okay, they're brewed with sugar. I get all these like sugary style aroma notes. But if you were to plug your nose and just let this wash over your palate, there's not a whole lot of residual sugar that kind of like sticks there. And that's what makes them so damn drinkable. You know what I mean? It's just like there's not much bitterness in the way of like hop character to speak of, but the way that it's so dry, a little bit peppery, clovey, nutmeggy, you're just left with that linger, kind of that phenolic and dry linger, and you just have to keep reaching back in to take another sip. So that's probably my favorite part. The newer one, the non-expired one, is much more lively with that fresh fruit character. It's a much fresher plum character. I don't think it's as bitter. So that lively kind of
No.
like bigger estery character kind of guards you against those peppery characters just like sitting on your tongue. Westmalle is like right in the middle zone of Belgian double in general, right at that 7%. I noticed a lot of American interpretations seem to hover around that 8%. It's something we just do over here is bump them up a little bit. You can still get this beer almost anywhere. It's not exactly a gas station beer everywhere. Any store that carries imports of any kind, you're likely to run into this beer. I know like Belgian styles in general maybe feel like they're down a little bit across the board, even imports. Make sure you just pick this one up once in a while. I don't want to see it disappear. I don't think Westmalle Double in particular is at risk of that. They're kind of like the original gangsters of some of this. But my journey in like figuring out craft and import beers and just specialty beers in general, like I never gravitated toward the Belgian styles on my own until I had to study them. And then they're so complex and unfolding that they're beers like this are something to sit with. And so I hope you all grab some and see what we're talking about. This beer in particular and this style, super characterful yeast, medium plus on all of those ester and phenol characteristics, little bit of alcohol warming, lots of floral character. In Belgium, it seems like they eschew style designations a little bit, it's just sort of like the monastery brews this beer. It's just Westmalle Double. It's not some category that, somebody made up that they're trying to fit into kind of this rigid set of rules. So the flip side of that is we've kind of tried to neatly categorize them as we study them. But Belgians, they brew whatever they want. They'll put fruit in it, they'll spice it up. They'll try to keep it subtle or, kind of in your face. They don't care. It reminds me of an old, I think it was Craft Beer and Brewing podcast episode with Peter Buchart, where they were he was railing about how everybody's talking about biotransformation of hops. Why don't we start talking about biotransformation of coriander or biotransformation of orange peels, and it's just like, leave it to Belgians. They'll put any spice in the beer. And I love that, which makes it unique as a style. Like, how do you pin it down? How do we have this thing that we call Belgian double when it can be so varied? But this one is going to be driving right down the middle of, a lot of what that style has to offer.
And then what are you getting in terms of like mouthfeel characteristics? What's the carbonation at? Texture? You kind of already touched on alcohol warming. What are some other things that you got going on?
These are so highly carbonated that they are almost kind of fluffy and creamy. These are going to be up there in volumes of CO2, and they just kind of like bursts open on your palate. And so I think that can trick me. I don't know about you. It can trick me sometimes into getting like that creamy sensation. Almost tricks me into thinking there's some vanilla, some of those other like sweeter, almost mapley, or that sugar character that makes you think it's a little more decadent than it is. And so, yeah, highly carbonated. Body, ironically, is thinned out by the use of dark candy sugar in these style of beers, but it doesn't feel like thin, with that big carbonation. It's like chewing on a really airy marshmallow almost. It's just got a big, fluffy character. It's cloud. It's drinking a cloud.
Sounds like one of the common things I'm hearing come up is there's a lot of impressions of things, that the beer is giving off this impression of sweetness or body or whatever. When we try and compare this to other styles, which is obviously something we're doing a lot because we're practicing a lot of blind tasting as we prepare for the master exam. So when you're comparing it to other styles, how can it be kind of different from those styles, but also how can they be confusing maybe in a blind setting?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but one of the most difficult styles for me to tangle this away from is German style wheat beers, like a Dunkelsweiss beer or like a dark Weizenbock, because you're getting super characterful yeast. And, while this beer in particular isn't throwing me like oodles of banana like the German Weizenbocks can, some of the other doubles and quads can give you lots and lots of banana. I could easily trick myself into thinking that this is German. And I think the trick with that, the way to untangle it is, you were asking about the finish and the body. That kind of super dry, peppery, phenolic linger, not likely to use, if they're using wheat, not like a ton of it, is going to finish a lot drier than your average German style wheat beer. When you do that nose plug trick with a German wheat beer, you will feel a little bit more residual sugar on your palate. And so I think that can help. I can speak confidently about being able to untangle this from a bunch of other styles and pretend like I know what I'm talking about. But I've called this beer in particular in blind settings all kinds of different things. So you have to be careful. You're really a detective. I could confuse it on a bad day with American brown ale.
I was thinking British brown, yeah.
Yeah, British brown ale. It's kind of tough when you're in the weeds, really trying to figure it out. Luckily, this one in particular, and honestly, a lot of the Trappist doubles, for the ones that make a double, they're widely available and you can get a little more used to them, which is nice. But this like very dark amber to brown category of characterful, kind of like medium to medium plus strength beers, once you have like 3 or 4 things going on, that's tough. So are there any other ones you think you could confuse it with?
Charlie brings up a great point in the comments that he's confused it with Doppelbock. I've definitely done that before too. It's really easy to think, could this be an oxid? Because especially if you get a Doppelbock that's a little oxidized, then you get kind of those like sherry, kind of more like dark fruit notes too. So you can kind of confuse yourself that way. So that's one thing to always think about. Just if you think, maybe this is an oxidized version of this, it's, unless you're getting something like trans-2-nonal, that's probably not something to hang your hat on. For certain styles, I mean, again, if you're not really in tune to the perception of sweetness or just lack of actual sweetness, wee heavy's in the ballpark too, for kind of the same reason as Doppelbock. And those will have some darker fruit characters just naturally, just from some of the malt complexity. So something like McEwen Scotch Ale really comes to mind. I could see Orkney Skull Splitter being really confusing because that has a really prominent kind of pear isoamyl acetate that could maybe be seen as banana. And then you're kind of in the Chimay Red or La Trappe Double banana forward one. So that's one that really comes to mind.
Some other ones to look out for to compare and contrast a little bit would be the aforementioned Chimay Red or Rouge. And then what are the other certified Trappist doubles? Because some make one and some don't, right? So
right. La Trappe Double is another one that's certified. I'm trying to think. The other two I can think of that are on the BJCP are Korzendonk Bruin, which is an Abbey Ale, and then St. Bernardus Potter 6, which is an Abbey Ale. I know Affligem Double was in the 2015 guidelines. You could say Westletter an 8. I mean, you could probably throw that one in there too, but that's going to be much, much more difficult to get. But no, I think the two really big ones that are available here are Westmalle and Chimay.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then, you can get your hands on Rochefort 6 from time to time too, and that's a fun one.
Oh, that's yeah, they're
Because
certified too. Yeah, of course.
yeah, and it's that's a fun one because it's like substantially more pale than this one. It's not
Yes.
extremely pale, but
Yeah.
it looks like a completely different beer for sure. I was looking around and I forgot, and I need to pick up another bottle, but Lost Abbey does a double they call Lost and Found,
Yep.
and they brew it with raisins, which is fun. They just kind of, go ahead and mainline that dried fruit character, which is
Right.
great. I know that Taxman Brewing is a kind of Belgian style American brewery in the Midwest that David Nilsson talks about a lot. That guy's a wizard with Belgian style beers, and he does a lot of tastings kind of like this, where you can go through Belgian style beers, and he's in partnership with belgianstyles.com. So definitely check that out and make sure you
Yeah,
get
if
David
you're
in your
yeah, if
ear
you're
about Belgian beers in particular.
yeah, you can. I'm sure if you go to his Instagram, I think he's got a newsletter. I get it every so often, and it's got all of his events on there. And I did one with Belgian dark strong ales where we tried 7 different ones, and he guided us through all of them, and it was extremely informative. It was very very well done.
This is a great segue, I think, because David does a lot of beer and chocolate pairings.
Right.
And I'm curious what what are you reaching for to eat with this particular beer?
Yeah, I think one of the most recent pairings that I've actually done with this particular beer was just a mushroom ravioli with some toasted walnuts and some sauteed kale. Just like a real simple kind of like butter emulsion, not like a crazy, kind of cream-based sauce or anything. And that was really good. I think when you're getting into places like that where you just have a toasted walnut, kind of have that complement, and then you've got this umami character from the mushroom, which gives it this nice, fun, tension with the phenolic character, and then the butter kind of over, just things that are, butter and caramel impression. I mean, those are just, again, 2 things that are just married to each other. That was a really good pairing. There's a couple that I kind of have in the pipeline here that I really, really want to try. I want to get it in front of a quesadilla that's got a really kind of like nutty, maybe cheddar, or the dream scenario would be challerhocker, which is kind of this rich taste. It's got like roasted nuts and caramel and melted leeks, and it's got this really complex profile to it and melts well. So just kind of throw some of that in there and, add it to your melange of cheeses that go in a quesadilla. I think in terms of like Chinese food, I would go with something like char siu, kind of that really red colored Chinese barbecued pork. I think that would be a really amazing pairing that I want to try. If you're just going for something simple like an appetizer, I think fried plantains would be really fun to do with this beer. It's a really good canvas, that kind of really light, more kind of sweeter banana character, and also obviously the Maillard that you're going to get from the browning that you're going to get from the frying. That's just there's so many things for that to latch onto in this beer. And then for me, the last thing, and the thing to really watch out for is if you're going for this thing with dessert, you've got to watch out for the level of sweetness, because that's, I think, one thing where people can get a little tangled up is that this seems like it has a lot of sweet flavors, so I'm going to pair it with things like actual caramel, or things that are extremely, extremely sweet. And what kind of happens is that kind of runs over that portion of the beer, and then you get a lot more of the alcohol kind of hotness, and then that's kind of what you get. All you're really left with is ethanol and phenolics, and then it just kind of burns, at the end. So put away the ice cream and maybe just try a small dollop of whipped cream for your base. Maybe just try something a little less on the sweet side, like some sort of like Yorkshire pudding with just some lightly caramelized plums. Or maybe start with, there was something I learned about today. I've got it on here so I wouldn't forget. It's called vol au vent, and it's basically like a pastry cup. And then you can just put whatever you want in it. And you can do savory, you can do dessert. So just start with something like just a really light kind of pastry thing like Yorkshire pudding or vol au vent, and then just kind of go from there and build your pairing.
Huh, that sounds delicious.
Yeah, what about you? I know
Yeah.
You've got some, and you're more in the vegetarian realm, so.
Yeah, I'm going to hit you with a savory and a sweet for sure. The savory, I don't know if I'm just feeling festive again, but I really want to make a pumpkin soup with this. Squash in general is just such a good canvas. It's such a characterful beer, but it's not like a cartoon of itself. So you have so much like fun stuff to play with. A pumpkin soup that's a little bit peppery. I want to throw in some sage. That's just like reminds me of my grandpa. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and is also kind of like a really good spice style complement that's not extremely evident in the beer. We got to sprinkle some of those roasted pumpkin seeds on the top, make it nice and salty veggie stock base, just a really kind of like fall-inspired pumpkin soup. You know, maybe even toss half a bottle in there while you're cooking the soup. I don't know if that would work or not, but I definitely want to try it with that soup. It's such a versatile beer, and I think people lean toward Belgian-style beers for the holidays too, like big meals where there's lots of stuff going on because they're a little bit of a Swiss Army knife in terms of pairing. That would be my, American-inspired soup. The sweet, though, I'm going to hit you with brunch. Because I'm going to do this because I've been dreaming about this since we talked about doing this live. But there's a recipe I love in this cookbook called Vegan Brunch by Isa Chandra. And she does a zucchini spelt muffin. And so it's basically a zucchini bread in a muffin form, but that spelt is like a little bit sweeter wheat character. It's vegan, so it doesn't use eggs. It uses some other stuff, and it becomes like almost spongy and really fluffy. So I'm going to turn that into bread. I'm not going to do the muffins. I'm going to turn that into bread. Then I'm going to slice the bread, and I'm going to do one of two things, probably both. I'm going to toast it, with some vegan butter, a little bit of a sprinkle of cinnamon, and you could just have it like that. And you kind of have that like bright, sweet squash character, on a canvas of spelt. A little bit nutty, a little bit, of a wild card spice with the cinnamon, or make yourself some vegan French toast. You can do the non-vegan version if you want. I just always think through vegan versions, and then, drizzle a little bit of maple syrup on that bad boy. And I think that's like, brunch with that, these two, that maple syrup, not too heavy, start drawing out some of those darker fruit flavors, the caramels from some of the malt. I'm really feeling that idea. So I'm going to try both of those sooner rather than later because it's making me hungry thinking about it.
I was going to say that's a lot. I think we got a lot of really good options there. I think we went through some good stuff. So you could easily build a 5-course meal. No problem.
Yeah.
No problem.
Well, cheers to that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more about Westmalle Dubbel or beer in general, I always start with M. Sauter's Pints and Panels. You can go learn about all the different styles, all the different vital statistics and flavor notes in cartoon form, which is incredible. Make sure to check out David Nilsson Beer. He is, like I said, a wizard with Belgian beers and guides a lot of tastings, and through BelgianStyles.com, they'll send you a bunch of Belgian beers, so that's incredible. Keep your eye out for local Belgian-style doubles. Make sure to keep grabbing these, please. I want the importer to keep bringing them in, and I'm sure we're just as guilty as some other people. So treat yourself to a Westmalle Dubbel soon, and maybe rewatch this and let us know what you think.
And then one last reference where I got most of my history and the recipe stuff was from Brew Like a Monk. So that's a really great book to get. That when I study, that's my treat if I'm tired of studying, because it's just such a fun book to read through. Grab that and grab yourself a double and read through that. And we'll see everybody next time. So thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Cheers.
Cheers.